Dear Minister of Science and Technology, Mr. Isa Shai, His Excellency, the Ambassador of France in Israel, Monsieur Eric Danon, the Minister Counselor of the Embassy of Israel in France, Monsieur Daniel Alevi-Gotshel, the President of the France-Israel Foundation, Dr. Muriel Chaim, dear distinguished guests from France and Israel, dear participants to our webinar, Shalom from Israel. It's a great privilege and real pleasure to welcome you at our France-Israel webinar on artificial intelligence application in the COVID-19 pandemic. I am David Harari, the co-chairman of the France-Israel High Council for Scientific and Technological Cooperation. I would like to greet the 180 participants in this webinar coming from France, Senegal, Italy, Croatia, Netherlands, Canada, United States, and Israel. Unfortunately, I have to inform you about two small changes in the program following the obligation of Mrs. Shiley Spiegelman, Director General of the Ministry of Science and Technology, to be absent as a result of a professional obligation, and the announcement that Mr. Daniel Saada, the Chargé d'Affaires of the Embassy of Israel in France, being ill, he will be replaced by Mr. Daniel Alevi-Gotshel, Ministry Counselor at the Embassy of Israel in France. Well, the decision to host this webinar was taken by the Ministry of Science and Technology to intensify the existing scientific relations between Israel and France. The French Embassy in Israel, the French Institute, and the France-Israel Foundation have joined the
Hello. It is my pleasure to be here with all of you and to represent the Israeli government and my ministry, the Ministry of Science and Technology. First of all, I would like to thank Ambassador of France in Israel, His Excellency Eric Danon. Thank you, Ambassador Danon, for being with us and for your warm support of the strong ties as they relate also to science and technology collaboration between France and Israel. I'd also like to thank Dr. Muriel Chaim, the president of the France-Israel Foundation, for her support and collaboration around this event, and my best wishes for a quick recovery to Mr. Daniel Saada from the Embassy of Israel in France. We have prepared a number of slides that indicate the involvement of the Ministry of Science and Technology in the government efforts and strategy in facing the COVID-19 pandemic here in Israel. For a start, I would like to mention that the Israeli government has put in place a special coronavirus cabinet, which is the executive arm of the Israeli government in facing the various facets of the coronavirus challenges. Those facets are in the area of medicine, treatments, quick testing, economic faces and the various other issues that the government has to face on the policy and executive basis when dealing with giving the appropriate response to the pandemic challenges. The Ministry of Science and Technology has set special task forces and has put significant efforts and resources into this situation as from the very start of the pandemic here in Israel in early February of this year. On the research front, we have called for proposals for research which would support the Israeli government efforts in identifying solutions to the pandemic situation. Out of more than 350 proposals that were submitted to the ministry, we have funded 84 proposals so far. A good number of them focused on medical research and others related to the social science and the public health domains, issues of policies, public trust in government provisions, compliance, and so on. Overall, this was a significant effort by the academic community here in Israel, which we welcomed and continue to support. A good number of these projects have been elevated to the awareness of the government coronavirus cabinet and the government ministers overall. One of the vaccines developed in Israel is supported by our office, the Office of the Ministry of Science and Technology. This is an institute of research and development in the north of Israel called Migal. There is an effort, a focused effort there at Migal to develop a vaccine, and this would be the second vaccine effort here in Israel to support the global efforts in identifying the cure or vaccination for the pandemic. We are working closely with the ecosystem here in Israel to identify technology, science, healthcare startups that could provide the government solutions, available solutions for the current situation. And a number of them have been elevated, practiced, and some of which are already in pilot or deployment within the various government organizations that deal with the situation. And another interesting one is the so-called Team 19. This is a multidisciplinary advisory group that has been set together by researchers and technology people from various disciplines, all of whom are working together to support the Israeli government, to support the ministry's efforts within the coronavirus cabinet. And this team has been preparing a number of policy papers and has come up with a number of solutions to some of the challenges that the cabinet has been dealing with. Just as a quick example, we have recently advised the government around a policy for opening small hotels and what we call the area of remote, non-urban hotel specialties, areas in the periphery of the country that can host internal tourism here in Israel, still within the main challenges of the coronavirus situation. The Team 19 has come up with the appropriate procedures and provisions to support the opening of those bed and breakfast hotel facilities, and they are now open for business. About 6,000 plus of these hotel rooms are now being available for internal tourism here in Israel, which is a significant relief both for the business sector that deals with these facilities and for internal tourism here in Israel. We've also advised with Team 19 to the Israeli government in creating what is called today 2 green islands, the area of Eilat in the south of Israel and the area of the Dead Sea in the eastern side of Israel, both of which have been sort of isolated driving tourism in a safe and healthy fashion to those areas. We are presenting today to the Israeli cabinet of coronavirus challenges a full solution, which we think is an appropriate solution to the reopening of the education system in Israel. So that's another good example as to how to use science and research in advising policymakers and using significant knowledge in the area of AI and other research disciplines to support the education system and other policy areas. One of the most significant areas for the operation of Team 19 and the reliance of the cabinet on those findings is modeling and predictions. We have been asked and tasked on an ongoing basis to provide support to the cabinet in terms of understanding what could happen, what is happening, and what should be able to expect in coming weeks in order to assist the government in setting its policies. This is the critical area of operation for the government cabinet, as by looking into what can happen, we have to drive conclusions backwards to the current situation. As an example, in early September, we were facing a high rise in the pandemic cases here in Israel on a daily basis. We have reached a situation of 2,000, 3,000, and then 5,000 and 6,000 cases per day. And we had to predict how long will it take before the system may not be able to absorb. The system means the healthcare system in Israel might not be able to absorb the number of patients that would need to be hospitalized and taken care of in Israeli coronavirus divisions within hospitals. And so we needed to use predictive models, and we needed to predict how fast could those situations develop, what are the sensitivities, and what do we need to drive in terms of policy as we looked at those numbers when they unfolded on a daily basis, sometimes a few times a day, using the models and the numbers in order to predict to the government what is going on and what may happen. This drove the government's ability to maintain control on the situation and to also be able to predict, today we can say on a very accurate basis, what is going on right now, what is coming next week, next couple of weeks, all the way through a 30 days period. And that was critical to driving the government's policy as we entered the second lockdown, which took place in Israel in the last week of September through the first 2 weeks of October. We also used the AI and modeling in order to analyze the economic costs and the economic ramifications of the pandemic. We always have to balance in this situation the cost of business, the economic ramifications of lockdowns and countrywide provisions, which in many cases affect in a very significant way the Israeli economy, as it does affect many other economies around the world. And we had to balance that with the healthcare ramifications of reopening some of the economic sectors and letting people go to work, letting people open their businesses. So again, this is an area of research, of analyzing, of practicing the most current algorithms in order to be able to assist decision-making and policy-making processes. Next slide, please. Thank you. So here's an example of a questionnaire analyzed, or first of all, invented, devised by one of the researchers in this team, on Team 19. This is Professor Eran Segal from the Weizmann Institute in Israel. And this is a model that was used here with about a little bit over 1 million questionnaires spread out and answered, and then This questionnaire was used to predict infection with people who did not take the infection or the coronavirus test yet. And this model was developed to indicate a very significant correlation between this questionnaire analysis and the predicting of a concentration of coronavirus infections developing in a certain area. We know that this model was practiced in 3 or 4 other countries, and the successful implementation of this model is driving today one of our strategies when suggesting to the Israeli government to reopen the education system. As you all may be aware of, it is a significant challenge to run accurate tests by children, by young children. It is an unpleasant, inconvenient test, which most kids would rather avoid, and definitely their parents. So we see a very strong correlation between filling up questionnaires, which are online questionnaires, prior to going into testing and avoiding the need for compulsory coronavirus testing for kids. There is a significant correlation, and we know today that filling up and adhering to the questions and analysis suggested by Professor Segal and his team in the Whiteman Institute would help us reopen the school system, identifying developing situations, and then isolate those areas where we believe by the models that a situation may created, which may lead to the disease spreading out in a specific area. Next slide, please. Another model that we used over here was a model of prediction of the critically ill patients. This is an important factor in terms of policy setup and management of the situation on a national basis. One of the strategies and goals set by the Israeli government was never to saturate or to oversaturate the hospital and healthcare system in Israel. We knew the capacity of our hospitals, which at a certain point was increased from about 700 critically ill coronavirus patients to over 1,000 critically ill patients. So we have the capacity, but when you have an exponentially growing disease, you want to make sure that at any given time, you do not exceed that capacity. We wanted to avoid almost at any cost the situation of patients approaching hospitals and being rejected just because the hospitals have no further capacity to treat them. We wanted to avoid this, and so we needed to provide the government a buffer so that the government always can understand what is the flexibility that we have in terms of setting other policies, in terms of going into countrywide provisions, lockdown, or anything else. And this is how we use these numbers. The way this model works is it identifies the number of new cases on a daily basis. It splits those cases into age groups. It goes back to the history of those age groups and applying the history into the current situation, and then looking into models, international models, and models applied by other countries in order to be very accurate on the likelihood of any patient within those models to become a critically ill patient. We developed a pretty accurate understanding of the situation. And as a matter of fact, as we followed up closely on the developing situation in the months of July, August, September, and October, when we reached the level of more than 900 critically ill patients, we had a pretty good understanding as to why we would not approach the 1,000 patients threshold given by the model. And by the way, we today know that the model was pretty accurate. It is hard to look over here at the accuracy, but you can see here that the predictions were pretty accurate and gave us the appropriate flexibility in setting government policies to the point where when we crossed the 900 patient threshold, We knew that this would be an error of plus minus 20 patients, more or less. We had confidence in the models, we had confidence in the prediction, and they did not fail on us. We approached a very good understanding of the disease, and this is again thanks for the application of clever algorithms based on careful analysis of many pieces of data analyzed with sophisticated algorithms, applying business intelligence, artificial intelligence, and other algorithms that proved to be appropriate and accurate in this case. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this is the last slide. I want to end maybe with a general comment. This pandemic has proved, I don't know that we needed that proof, but for those of us not in this event, but generally speaking, those of us who needed yet another proof of the importance of science, research, independent research, and the collaboration of scientists around the world, those of us who needed yet another proof, this is probably one of the most important showcases in recent times for humanity as to the importance of science, the capability of science and research to support the global health situation, the global economy, and frankly, the global population in recovering, in facing nature challenges, coping with them, and moving on. What we are seeing here is the collaboration of scientists around the world, which will eventually take us through vaccinations, will take us through medicines, to face a very significant challenge that humanity is facing today. You know, if one of the things we want to do is identify opportunities within situations, let's call this coronavirus challenge also a big opportunity for all of us to embrace science, to promote scientists and research, to allocate the appropriate budgets to support them with governmental policies. And I think that this event today is yet another possibility to celebrate the importance of working together. In this case, working together is French and Israeli scientists collaborating and continuing this very strong collaboration between our nations and between our researchers to promote science and to provide solutions to France, to Israel, and frankly, to everybody around us, which is humanity around the world. I would like to thank you again for having me here and giving me the opportunity to be part of this important event. Wishing you fruitful, a successful, very interesting event for the benefit of all of us. Thank you very much.
Thanks, dear Minister, for this clear and very encouraging presentation. We hope, like you, to expand partnerships with our French colleagues. I would like to first to apologize for the interruption of the internet. Unfortunately, sometimes Murphy is without, we did not invite Murphy, but sometimes he's coming home. But now I would like, with a great pleasure, I would like to invite His Excellency, the Ambassador of France in Israel, Monsieur Eric Danon, to express his support to our event. Mr. Danon.
Le micro, oui, ça va. Bien, bonjour à tous. Je vous salue tous, chers amis. And thank you, Minister, for recalling the importance of scientific cooperation between France and Israel. And it was a great pleasure meeting you last Monday, and I do hope this is just the beginning of many fruitful exchanges to come. I would also like to thank the Israeli Ministry of Science and Technology and the France-Israel Foundation for their hard work in making this event happen. And You know, it is always a pleasure for the French Embassy and the French Institute of Israel to work in partnership with you. In 2020, more than ever, under exceptional circumstances and challenges that must be addressed as quickly as possible, science needs to be carried collectively and internationally in order to make breakthroughs. The current public health situation in France is severe, as it was in Israel a few weeks ago. We are now undergoing our second lockdown, which started on October the 30th due to an important increase in the number of cases, over 1 million in the country, and with no official date of ending, of course. Our healthcare system is under strain, with more than 30,000 people hospitalized due to COVID-19 complications. This situation, although very tough, has also been the catalyst for many advances in research. And to support research projects, the government contributes through funding. A call for projects related to COVID-19 has been launched by the National Research Agency, and it has resulted in the selection of 86 research projects, which will benefit from a grant of 14.5 million euros. This has been made possible thanks to the emergency funds released by the Ministry of Education, Research and Innovation and the commitment of the Foundation for Medical Research. Moreover, France voted on Friday its new research reform law, stating that an additional 25 billion euros will be invested in research between 2021 and 2030. And it will increase the annual budget to 20 billion euros per year in 2030, which is 5 billion more than its current level. As in Israel, a COVID-19 scientific council and an expertise analysis committee has been created to assist the government in setting up relevant measures in order to curb the pandemic in the most efficient way, while tempering its psychological consequences in the future. Among its recommendations, the Council has been promoting the use of new technologies as tools to trace the chains of contamination. To this end, an application has been launched, Stop COVID, followed by its updated version, Tous Anti-COVID, namely All Against COVID. We are learning along the way, but what is certain is that new technologies like artificial intelligence are transforming the way we had been envisioning healthcare until now. The development of artificial intelligence and its diffusion in our society is a sure sign of progress, but it also raises new issues and challenges that are important to address. With this goal in mind, we have launched this year a series of panel discussions that will continue in 2021. And based on a dialogue between French and Israeli experts on artificial intelligence, these discussions will cover a broad range of topics pertaining to the use of AI in health, of course, but also defense, automotive, gender, art, and more. In July of this year, an insightful dialogue between Cédric Villani and Isaac Ben Israel has confirmed that French and Israeli visions on artificial intelligence are very similar, both parties sharing the same priority domains: agriculture and environment, transportation, defense, and obviously health. Driven by the urgency of the situation, transnational research enables innovations to span from bench to bedside, quickly pivoting laboratory discoveries into new tests and therapies for the patients. The 7 French health competitiveness clusters present throughout the country are taking an active part in the fight against the pandemic. They contribute transforming scientific and technological knowledge into therapeutic and economic value. And these competitiveness clusters act in public-private cooperation together with research entities and industry organizations. They also aim to enhance cooperation with countries abroad. Indeed, links between startups and companies from France and Israel are crucial to forge a long-lasting bond. To this end, Business France office in Israel aims at facilitating partnerships between companies from both countries. And in addition, a French expert in technological research and innovation works to support bilateral cooperation, especially in health and COVID-19 related sectors, by helping to strengthen French-Israeli cooperation in European programs and by participating in the implementation of bilateral objectives. This exemplifies how can bridge be built in the innovation ecosystem between French and Israeli actors, both public and private. The French-Israeli High Council for Science and Technology embodies this determination to work together in common challenges and priority topics. In the incoming weeks, it will be launching a call for proposals on interdisciplinary approaches to anticipate future viral pandemics. And I therefore encourage scientific teams from France and Israel to submit joint projects on this very important stake. So, Mr. Minister, let me conclude by saying that France highly values scientific cooperation with Israel. I believe scientific symposiums, such as this one, an amazing opportunity to bring together communities of researchers, doctors, and startups from both countries. Together, we can spark new ideas of cooperation and thus keep strengthening the bond and friendship between our countries. So I wish you all a very, very pleasant and informative conference. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Minister. Bonne journée à tous. Merci.
Thanks, Mr. Eric Danon, for this encouraging message. In fact, indeed, the France-Israel High Council is, of course, a platform that we must strengthen and expand in order to continue to develop our scientific and technology relationship. We are committed, both of us, for such objectives. Thank you very much. Now, from Paris, I would like to invite Mr. Daniel Alevi-Gotchel, Ministry Counselor of the Embassy of Israel in France. Daniel, please, the floor is yours.
Merci, merci Monsieur le Ministre, merci Monsieur l'Ambassadeur, merci Professeur Harari, et bonjour à tous de Paris. I have the pleasure to read today a message which was prepared by my friend and our chargé d'affaires, Mr. Daniel Saada, but yesterday he lost his voice, so he asked me to convey you his message. I am very happy for this opportunity to open this Franco-Israeli seminar intended for better understanding how AI can help us and control the COVID crisis. France and Israel have maintained a tight relationships in the sciences of technology and research. It is no coincidence. Our two societies are moved by the same taste of knowledge, teaching, and training culture. Our research centers work together for many long years. The oldest Franco-Israeli cooperation for more than 40 years is actually the Conseil Pasteur Weizmann. However, it isn't the only one. All our universities, all our research centers, and all our hospitals and medical centers have partners in France with which they work daily and with which they exchange and work to build a better future. I want to remind you that Israel is one of the few countries outside of the European Union with which France has put together a High Council for Science and Technology Cooperation. Numerous research projects have been able to be carried out thanks to the grants of and the impulse of that High Council. I am taking the opportunity to thank my friend Dr. David Harari, who served as the co-chairman on the Israeli side of the council. The scientific operations touches many areas. I want to emphasize here the importance and the high level of effectiveness in the relationship between our spatial agency and the French CNES, who perfected the common satellite Venus, launched now almost 3 years ago, and which delivers incredible feats featured in the environmental study in the fight against global warming. David Ben-Gurion wrote in his notebooks before the creation of the State of Israel that he was dreaming to make of Israel a power in the scientific research area. He was realizing, and I quote him, that Israel will never fill the quantitative gap that separates him from his neighbors, and that in the hostile world in which that state has been created, it will be necessary to work endlessly to bridge the quantitative gap. It is a question of survival, but also a question of faith. These were his words, and his vision was assuredly the one from the prophets, that's to say, to make of Israel the light of the nations. So, at a time when humanity needs to meet one of its essential health challenges in modern times, we have to congratulate ourselves of the cooperation between our two countries to meet that challenge together and put our resources together, our knowledge, our common intelligence to build a better world that we are hoping for. Thank you very much and have a fruitful seminar today.
Thanks, Mr. Daniel Alevi-Gotshel, for with all our appreciation. I fully agree. The development of a scientific and technological relationship between the two countries will lead to broadening the development, industrial or commercial sectors, which will be certainly beneficial for both sides. Now, last but not least, I would like to invite my friend, really real friend, Dr. Muriel Haim, president of the France-Israel Foundation. Muriel, please.
Thank you, David. His Excellency Zachai, Ministry of Science and Technology, His Excellency Eric Danon, Ambassador of France, Mr. Alevi-Gotshel from the Israel Embassy in France, and of course, David, my dear partner in the Foundation. Good morning. I want to thank you for your participation to this webinar, as well as the following speakers and the participants. I want to say a few words about the Foundation. The Foundation was initiated by French President Jacques Chirac and Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon in 2005. The goal was to strengthen the ties between the two civil societies, the Israeli and the French one, as those two societies share values of freedom and democracy. But they have also major difference, and those different can be, adding difference can be different strengths and can lead to wonderful results through cooperation in different domains, such as science and economics. Among other topics that the Foundation is taking care, we are involved in agriculture, building ties between Volcani Institute and INRAE. And we are working also between France and Israel scientists on handicap domain. The objective is through sharing of experience to build partnership in science and economic cooperation. Last but least, I would like to emphasize our student program. Every year, the Foundation brings over 300 students from the best engineer school, business school, and political university to discover Israel, the startup nation. Most 80% of the students have never been to Israel. It's their first trip. The student will be the future key decision maker. And our goal is In order to continue building cooperation between our two countries, to put Israel, the startup nation, on their radar screen, then when they will be confronted to some technological or economic issue. I don't want to go longer, and I wish all of you a fruitful conference, which hopefully will lead to cooperation. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Muriel, for this warm message. The COVID-19 pandemic has affected all aspects of our life, from our health to our modification of our work, our lifestyles, whatever the age of human beings, from children to elderly. Not being able to do this with all subjects, we choose 4 different but also complementary subjects for the different panels of our webinar. We will talk about the organization of hospitals to receive patients, followed by 2 examples of scientific research subjects. We will present 2 companies providing technology fighting against COVID-19, and we will end with the laundering of anti-Semitism on social networks and the impact of the pandemic on loneliness among older adults. Each 4 panels will have 2 conferences. At the end of each panel, we will be able to receive 2 questions from the end audience for the speakers. I would like to apologize for limiting the number of questions to 2, because it's necessary to keep our symposium schedule. Thank you very much. Now, our first panel deals on artificial intelligence applications in the COVID-19 pandemic, and will host 2 speakers who will present some artificial intelligence technology used in 2 hospitals in Israel and in France. Our first speaker is Mr. Avner Halperin from Sheba Medical Center, Tel HaShomer. Avner is an entrepreneur and executive in the fields of digital health and big data analytics. He's a chairman of the board at Eye Control and leads innovation initiative at Sheba Medical Center as the head of Global Arc and City of Health Nation. Mr. Avner Halperin, we invite you to present how at the Sheba Medical Center the COVID-19 is found and how human lives are saved. Thank you.
Excuse me. Hello. Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to present what we do at Sheba on AI and battling COVID-19 and how we help save lives. I appreciate this, the time you're giving us. A quick introduction of Sheba, one of the top 10 best hospitals in the world, one of the biggest hospitals in the Middle East, multiple facilities, acute care hospital, rehab, cancer center, children's hospital, etc. Close to 2,000 beds and 75 laboratories and 160 medical departments. What all this great number of beds and labs generate is huge amounts of data. And as I am sure all of you know, data is the key and the key ingredient and the raw material for artificial intelligence and machine learning to save lives. So here is an example of the data lake that we created at Sheba Medical Center, collecting information from multiple sources. Sheba has been digital for several decades, so there are data records of millions and millions of patient care records collected in this huge database as the key basis for artificial intelligence development. Around that, Sheba created a new approach to driving innovation in healthcare that we like to call the ARC. ARC is the acronym for Accelerate, Redesign, and Collaborate. And with that, we create an ecosystem that will truly change the future of medicine by collaborating with multiple partners. The idea is to have open innovation. Sheba opens its platform, its campus to startups, members of the industry, academia, and other type of partners to join innovation efforts to streamline processes, both locally and globally. The fundamental principles include, of course, striving for improved digital health based on open innovation, opening the campus, extensive international collaborations. And of course, we're very open and would be happy to have collaborations with partners in France, academic, business, and clinic. And of course, a very strong innovation infrastructure that has been developed here in Israel and specifically at Sheba Medical Center. Here are some of the startups that Sheba has been working with, a large number, mostly Israeli companies, but also companies coming from overseas. These startups have the opportunity to co-locate at Sheba, get access to the data, again, that huge data lake that we mentioned, and collaborate closely with clinicians, with ARC on reinventing healthcare. It's not just startups. We all know that to create a true valuable long-term impact in healthcare, we need to connect between startups, larger corporate partners, like you see here, the Baxters and AstraZenecas and Microsofts of the world, as well as academic centers, again, globally and locally, and multiple clinical centers, not just Sheba, but others, all collaborating on testing and driving innovation. We are now also driving this concept of ARC that's been very successful in Israel towards driving such innovation centers globally. You see here ARC in Ottawa, Canada, that has been initiated, and a new project recently announced of ARC in Chicago, and maybe, God willing, we'll have an ARC in Paris at some point. And so that's a little background about Sheba and what we do. Now let's talk about how we approach the coronavirus, especially from the technology aspect. So Corona arrived, and Sheba and this ARC Innovation Center got into what we call battle mode, COVID-19 battle mode. We're leveraging all the capabilities of innovation and collaboration and reinvention and redesign in order to find better solutions to deal with COVID-19. I'll show you a few examples in a minute. We accelerated technology adoption. We knew that we have to blur the line between home and hospital. I'll show you some examples, and emphasized very strongly the connection of the human aspect, especially in Corona, that drives people apart, that does social distancing, very strong focus on connecting the patients and making sure they are not taken apart too distantly from their families. A quick comic point, we see COVID-19 as a driver for strong acceleration of innovation. You see this coming from the Business Illustrator asking who led the digital transformation of your company. Was it the CEO? Was it the CTO? No, it was actually COVID-19 that drives innovation. We know necessity is the mother of invention, and COVID-19 truly accelerated innovation globally and also within medical centers that some are, in some cases, not the fastest to adopt technologies. Here, technology adoption is accelerated. So, for example, one of the things that was done at Sheba Medical Center was what is called the Corona Data Challenge. Sheba opened its data bases of COVID-19 patients to allow different companies to build predictive analytic models of how patients are likely to do and what are the optimal timing and types of interventions required based on the data that's collected in real time. And today, this database, of course, is growing continuously, and data up to the last day, an hour, is available to partners to continuously improve algorithms, which again is critical because without data, you cannot develop artificial intelligence solutions. We, around that, also built a new concept that I'll show you a video of in a minute, which is called the ARC Corona Smart Room, or the Health Space 2030, the patient room of the future. We designed a space where we can actually implement and test new technologies for COVID-19 in a fully immersive simulated environment. Here is one example of a technology that has been implemented, developed by a company called Clue Medical. It is an AI-based platform that collects information from multiple sources: electronic medical record, continuous vital sign sensors, and inputs from clinicians and video into a cloud-based platform that actually detects which patients are at highest risk and alerts clinicians to those patients. All data is analyzed and driven into a clinical AI platform. You'll see an example of an implementation in a minute. This does both enables early intervention, but also, which we all know is very critical in clinical implementation, manages alarm fatigue. So it does both giving the alerts, but in a small number of alarms in order not to do the generate the cry wolf syndrome. One more example of a technology that's been implemented in Sheba is a company called EarlySense that I happen to be the CEO of in the past. This is a company that developed a sensor that goes under the mattress of a bed and through the mattress in a completely non-contact way, collects continuous information of heart and breathing. And again, on that does huge data analytics, providing a specific score on how likely this patient is to deteriorate around COVID-19. So based on a huge database from the past of over 1 million patients, the company can predict now on these new type of patients, COVID-19, which are at the highest risk. So around that, these technologies and others, we build an environment that we call the patient room of the future or health space 2030. This is a fully immersive demonstration and simulation space that allows us to test these artificial intelligence solutions. And again, this patient room of the future. It provides what we call a sandbox where we can test in a realistic environment, but in a safe environment, and integrate new technologies, and allows us both to give feedback to developers and also make decisions which technologies need to be integrated and which not. And this is done with actual actors playing the part of patients. So without further ado, I will actually show you what we did in this patient room of the future. This is a video that we also showed at a webinar that had thousands of participants a few months ago. And you can find it online. We can be happy to share it. What you see here is the story of a patient that we simulated with the different AI technologies that are being tested in Sheba. So this patient right now, for example, is talking on the phone. And this is, of course, an actor, but we are simulating and testing the different technologies. And while he's talking on the phone, technology developed by a company called Vocalis that analyzes his voice actually looks for deterioration based on his voice patterns. And because a voice a deterioration indication is found, a physician who sits in a control room, which is critically important, of course, in COVID-19 environments when we want to keep physicians as much as possible away from patients, sends a robot inside. This is a robot that actually is in use today at Sheba Medical Center and allows a lot of close interaction. Again, remember the personal connection without having to send the physician in with all the protective cover. So this is another example of a technology that's being used. While this patient is talking, additional sensors monitor him. For example, this EarlySense sensor I mentioned before that is goes under the mattress of the bed. And as this dialogue with the patient is continuing, EarlySense system detects a deterioration based on the pattern that's collected on the patient's vital signs. The actual AI system detects that this patient is at high risk and indicates to the clinician that intervention is required. The unique thing here is that this is based on a very large database of historic data, but also very new data specific for this patient. And based on that, now the physician does actually go in and interacts with the patient. I'll show you a few more examples of the technologies being implemented now at Sheba. What you see here again is that clue system that we talked about. You see the the team in the control room, looking at information indicating that this patient is deteriorating. This control tower type system is actually giving us the information that we need in order to know which patients need to be transferred into the ICU. Another important point to think about in terms of AI is that AI is not, artificial intelligence is used not just for improving the care of the patient directly, but also in handling the clinicians. This is a technology called AnyVision that was tested and used in the past in supermarkets to track customers, and now is being used at Sheba to track clinical caregivers and to see, first of all, verify that everybody's wearing their protective gear, but also once we have found a clinician who is ill, we can actually go back to the whole history, and the system automatically defines and finds which other clinicians this doctor was in close proximity to without his mask, as you see here. And then these clinicians are sent to seclusion, and that's how we prevent infection transferring from one clinician to another. So this is a great example of AI being taken from one field of commercial services into the field of improved patient care. And I'll stop here on this example, and I'll give you one more example of a technology that is that we are testing right now. Here's an example of a technology called MindU that actually not just monitors the voice of a patient, but also actually calls up the patient through the patient call system or through his phone, interacts with the patient in a robotic voice analytics, and analyzes the feedback of the patient, both what he says and how he says it, in order to identify if this patient is deteriorating. Again, another type of artificial intelligence solution that's used to drive improved care and also better information and better connection to the patients. So to summarize, at Sheba, what we have done is we've built this immersive location, leveraging the huge data sets that we have in order to continuously develop, implement, and accelerate implementation of and testing of AI-based technology. And we see them saving lives of patients in COVID-19 and other applications every day. So with that, I'll summarize and thank you for the opportunity to be part of this distinguished forum. And of course, we are more than happy and open to collaborations with France and with French players, clinicians, and members. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Avner, for this very impressive presentation. I fully agree that we have here the possibility of increase our cooperation with the French hospitals. Our second speaker is Dr. Guillaume Chassagnon from Cochin Hospital at Paris and Paris University. Dr. Chassagnon is a thoracic radiologist at Cochin Hospital in Paris. He obtained a PhD in mathematics and computer science at École Centrale Supélec, which is belonging to University of Paris-Saclay. And his main research topics are machine learning, interstitial lung disease, and bronchial diseases. Dr. Chassagnon, we are eager to learn how artificial intelligence technology can predict the severity of COVID-19. Please.
Thank you very much for the invitation to speak about anticipating the acute complication of COVID-19 using AI and chest CT scan. So I have nothing to disclose, and the story I'm going to tell starts here at the beginning of March. We were facing what we call now the first wave of the coronavirus pandemic. And at that time, we lacked PCR tests, and the CT scan was used by many hospitals for diagnosis and triage of patients at the emergency room. And in addition, there was the fear of a shortage of ventilators. So a lot of people hypothesize that the chest CT scan could also be used to predict severity and not only to diagnose the pneumonia. So there were several visual scores that were developed to quantify the disease extent on chest CT scan. And here you have 3 examples of this visual CT score. And what all this CT score shows is that lung disease extent has a prognosis value. And here it's an example of a chest CT score that has been developed by an Italian team. And you can see that they quantify the pneumonia extent on each lobe, and then they do the sum of it, and they have a score that range from 0 to 25. And when they look at the patient, they see that when a patient has a score of at least 18 over 25, he has a worse prognosis than the other. So we know that this extent is linked to the severity of the disease, and it's why the French Society of Thoracic Imaging and the French Society of Radiology ask radiologists to do structured reporting. And in this structured reporting, they ask radiologists to quantify the pneumonia extent using the following 6 grade scale, ranging from absent to critical disease extent. And here is what we have to do when we see a patient with COVID-19. We have to say if the pneumonia is less than 10% of the lung, between 10 and 25%, between 25 and 50% of the lung, between 50 and 75, or more than 75% of the lung. So this is a way to do a visual quantification, but we know that a visual quantification is quite difficult. It's the reproducibility of visual quantification is far from being perfect. And we also know that it's possible to perform automated disease quantification. It's something that we already know for interstitial lung diseases. And for example, this is a work we did on patients with systemic sclerosis. Systemic sclerosis is a connective tissue disease with interstitial lung disease. And in these patients, we developed a tool that is able to quantify the disease by outlining the disease on each slide of the CT scan. So we are able to quantify the disease very accurately. So a lot of people, many teams and companies began to develop deep learning based quantification tools. So these are, for example, two studies that has been reported in archive, a study from a Chinese team and a study from Siemens Healthcare. And in both cases, they shown that they were able to quantify the disease on the chest CT scan with a very good accuracy. There were also companies that developed tools like this. And so this is a Chinese company that offered its software in April, so very early during the pandemic. And so we tried also to develop at the same time our own quantification tool based on the experience we had in interstitial lung diseases. And this is the first part of this paper we recently published. So what we did is that we collected chest CT scan from 6 different hospitals from Paris, 6 hospitals from APHP, which is the group of hospitals from Paris. And from this CT scan, we asked 15 radiologists from our department to annotate all the slices, so all these 26,000 slices. In fact, there were 50 patients from 3 hospitals with different CT scan models that were used for training. And on these 50 patients, all the CT slices were annotated by the radiologist. And there were another group of 130 patients were used for testing. So we put all of this in an artificial intelligence network to train. What we did is that we used 2 different types of algorithm. We combine a 2D convolutional neural network and a 3D convolutional neural network. For the 2D convolutional neural network, CNN, we use AtlasNet, which is the architecture we developed during my PhD thesis to quantify the systemic sclerosis interstitial lung disease. And for the 3D network, we use a 3D CNN, and we combine everything together. And these are the results we obtain. So in blue, you can see the results of our algorithm, and you can see that it's very similar to what has been outlined by the two observers 1 and 2. So here you have the native CT images, and here you have what you can see, what has been annotated by the deep learning algorithm, but also by the two radiologists, and you can see that it's superimposed very well. If we look at some metrics to assess the overlapping between the segmentation, we can see that, so we use the dissimilarity coefficient, which is a common metric for this. The dissimilarity coefficient between observers is 70%. So it means that there is a very good overlap, but it's not perfect. But this is the reference. And if we look at the 2D network and the 3D network, we see that the 2D network perform better than the 3D network, but they don't reach the performances of the observers. The 2D network trend to over-segment the disease, whereas the 3D network trend to under-segment the disease. And when we combine the two networks, we reach the same performances as the observers with no more over or under segmentation. So we shown that deep learning can perform as well as radiologists to segment the COVID-19 pneumonia, but it's faster because it takes only a few minutes to the network to outline the disease versus around 10 hours for radiologists to outline very accurately all the CT slice of a chest CT scan. And we also shown that by combining 2D and 3D network, we were able to increase the performances. So at that time, we were able to do the same as the visual scoring, or even better. But maybe it was not enough to try to predict the severity of the patients. So we wondered how we can improve prognosis assessment. So by taking into account the appearance of the lesions, for example, here you have two patients with the same disease extent, but you can see that the lesions are not the same, and the prognosis was not the same for these two patients. This patient died and this one not. We can also take into account comorbidities, and there have been a lot of paper in the literature that shown that several factors are associated with mortality, for example, the age, but also obesity, diabetes, and many other factors that has been published here, for example, in the Lancet. So what we decided is to put everything together, and not only to focus on disease extent, but to try to include comorbidities to better predict the severity. And so it's what we did, and more specifically, we increase the size of our dataset, because you know that we need data to build accurate models. So we increased the dataset to 700 patients from 8 hospitals, still from the Paris area. We included clinical characteristics that were available, such as age, sex, diabetes, high blood pressure, body mass index. So these characteristics are known to be associated with the prognosis. We also included some laboratory findings. And we looked at the outcome at 4 days, so the short-term outcome, but also the long-term outcome at 1 month after the CT scan. So what we did is that we took our chest CT scan. I already shown you that we were able to do disease segmentation, but we also did a lung segmentation, cardiac segmentation, and fat segmentation. So this allowed us to extract radiometric features, so to try to extract characteristics from the disease, but also from the lung, from the heart, and from the fat. And we combined it with clinical characteristics and laboratory findings to build multi-omics models using an ensemble of classes. And And these are the results we obtain. We obtain a balanced accuracy of 70% to predict severity at 4 days. The severity was defined by deaths or intubations. And if we look at which features have been selected by the models, you can see that it's included disease characteristics, but also heart characteristic in green, lungs characteristic, and some biological data. So everything was very useful to try to predict the severity of the patient. We also compare these performances to a ground truth, and the ground truth is radiologist. We found that the AI performed better than radiologists to predict the short-term outcome, with a correct prediction in 81% of cases for AI, versus only 61% of cases for a consensus of radiologists, including a lot of radiologists. We, in order to assess the importance of each class of features, we perform an ablation study, and we shown that the contribution of clinical characteristic and laboratory findings was marginal to differentiate between severe and non-severe patients, meaning that most of the information was already present in the CT scan, and you just have to pick it by doing the segmentation and the radiomics approach. We also look at the outcome to try to predict the patients that are going to die within the first 4 days, and we had a balanced accuracy of 88% for this task, and to predict the final outcome and to differentiate between patients with short-term disease, long-term disease, and long-term recovery. And from this, for this task, we had a balanced accuracy of 71%. So in conclusion, we've shown that CT scan can be also used for severity assessments, and that combining chest CT scan and AI can provide tools for fast, accurate, precise disease extent quantification, but also for the identification of patients with severe outcome. And this could be of great help in the current context of the pandemics with a shortage in resources. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Chassagnon, for this presentation. No doubt about it that your research will help in the next future hospital prioritizing patients which based on vital urgency and so on. Now, we have received one question for you, Dr. Chassagnon. Well, I am reading. CT is long and expensive. From the analysis of the nasal tests, would it be possible to predict the disease quantification?
No, to my knowledge, no. CT is expensive. Yes, it's not so expensive in France, in fact, but the main advantage of CT is that you get the answer immediately. And it's not the case, or at least it was not the case during the first wave. It took like 12 hours or 24 hours to get the results. And when you are at the emergency room, you need a triage now. So you need to know now if the patient has a feature of COVID-19 pneumonia or not. And we know that the sensitivity and the specificity of the CT is very high, around 90%. So CT scan is a very effective tool when you don't have fast tests such, and the PCR is not a fast test, yes, yet.
Okay, another question to Mr. Avner. Well, it's a question or a funny remark. Mr. Avner, Alperin, you are in charge of the development of new concept of the hospital of the future. Did the means used in fighting the COVID-19 pandemic will accelerating your development?
Yeah, of course. I mean, that's what we see everywhere is that COVID-19
it's very funny. Yeah,
is driving faster adoption. Technologies like you saw, robotics and AI monitoring of voice and sensors and prediction are actually being implemented in use what would have taken in normal days, maybe 1, 2, or 3 years, happened here in weeks. I think that's one of the advantages of kind of a clinical site that's open to innovation, and certainly necessity made us be faster at it. And we saw very significant value in it. We're open to more technologies coming in from all over the world.
Okay, so this is the end of our first panel. I would like to thank the speakers, and we are going now to our second panel. Our second panel presents scientific studies on artificial intelligence application in the COVID-19 pandemic. And our first speaker is Professor Jean-Louis Pépin from Grenoble-Alpes University. Jean-Louis Pépin is professor of clinical physiology at Grenoble-Alpes University. He's head of the Clinic of Physiology, Sleep, and Exercise at Grenoble University Hospital, and vice dean of the Faculty of Medicine in charge of research and scientific director of clinical research at Grenoble University Hospital. Dear Professor Pépin, we would like to understand how big data and artificial intelligence can improve the knowledge and split care of COVID-19 patients. Mr. Pépin, please.
Good morning to all, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk. I will try to share my screen. That's it. So the topic I am going to address is the importance of artificial intelligence for looking at the evolution of sleep during the COVID-19 pandemic. We are going to speak about two different topics. The first one is the impact of lockdown on the life behaviors, and in particular, the changes in sleep architecture and quality. And the second one is that, as you know, during the COVID pandemic, there was an abrupt shutdown of the sleep laboratories around the world, with a decrease in access to care for sleep disorders and sleep problems. And there was a need to develop ambulatory and safe on-sleep testing supported by artificial intelligence. The first topic, in France especially, there was a nationwide home confinement or lockdown, a total lockdown, to prevent the spread of COVID-19 infection. This lockdown has the potential to change sleep behaviors and sleep characteristics, because there was a loss of external synchronizers, social activities, regular meal and sleep, exacerbation of existing familial or couple conflicts, increased alcohol consumption and addiction, and also financial difficulties. One of the major impacts of lockdown was on physical activities, and in turn, devastating effects on sleep. As you know, between nations, there were different modalities of restriction of citizen activities. And the first study I would like to show you is a study we did conduct using activity trackers in different countries with the Wizing company. This is a study we did publish recently, looking at 740,000 individuals and here in countries without lockdown, in Japan, Sweden, and Netherlands. In this situation, during lockdown, no modification of the number of steps in these countries without specific confinement. On the contrary, in France, you can see French data in blue. There was a huge reduction of the number of steps per day. Also, it was also true in Spain, in Italy, and also in China. So these measurements and big data analysis of million individuals in different countries are demonstrating the impact of lockdown in reducing physical activity in population related to the different rules with total, partial, or no lockdown. And regarding sleep, we need to have information in real life. And you have on the left of the slide a representative picture of the complexity of recording sleep in the sleep lab. But we have now innovative tools. And this is the example of the Dream headband you can use at home. And you can repeat longitudinal sleep studies before lockdown and during lockdown. And I will show you a study we conducted with Stanford University and Professor Emmanuel Mignot. What we did is use the Dream headband. So it's a very simple, user-friendly headband measuring sleep at home. And this is a comparison between classical scoring by experienced scorers in the sleep lab and the information provided by the Dream headband supported by artificial intelligence, providing automated sleep stage classification. We had a study in nearly 600 people using the Dream headband before lockdown and during lockdown. And you can see on these slides that overall individuals slept more, had less deep sleep, more light sleep, and an increase in REM sleep. The most interesting pattern was a change in sleep schedule. And you can see on this slide the wake time before lockdown and the wake up time before lockdown, with very obvious variation between week and weekend. And you can see during lockdown that bedtime and wake up time was delayed by an average of 15 and 21 minutes. We can see less weekend specific changes, and the effects were more pronounced in individuals reporting eveningness preferences. So using innovative technology supported by artificial intelligence to automated sleep scoring, we have a clear picture in real life condition of the changes of sleep during lockdown. A second example is the difficulty to continue to have sleep recordings for sleep disorders with the shutdown of the sleep laboratories inside the hospital. And we need to develop ambulatory and safe means and tools for continuing to care and to diagnose the patients. We will also discuss the interest of CPAP telemonitoring. CPAP is continuous positive airway pressure. This is a reference treatment for sleep apnea patients by pushing airway inside the upper airway. So what is obstructive sleep apnea? Obstructive sleep apnea is a very frequent chronic disease related to obstruction of the upper airway during sleep and associated cardiovascular and metabolic comorbidities. This is a very frequent disease affecting nearly 1 billion people worldwide, with a lot of people undiagnosed in Europe, and the prevalence is likely to continue to increase owing to obesity and diabetes pandemic. The diagnosis of obstructive sleep apnea is associated with severe forms of COVID-19 infections. So we used artificial intelligence for improving sleep apnea diagnosis pathway. On the left, you can see a classical polysomnography with several sensors for monitoring sleep, flow recordings, sound, thoracic and abdominal breaths, a microphone, an oximeter, a leg movement sensor. You can see that this is complicated, associated with long waiting lists, inequalities in access to care. It is labor intensive and requires sleep specialists to score the tracing, and there are patients' acceptance issues. We did develop an artificial intelligence solution using only a mandibular movement sensor and an automatic analysis of sleep and respiratory events. This is potentially of a major interest during pandemic periods like COVID-19 pandemic. And you can see the solution. You have a mandibular movement sensor on the chin. You have web automatic storage of the recordings during the night. There is a web application, an automatic scoring supported by machine learning. And at the end of the night, you have a sleep scoring, and you have available the number of apneas and hypopneas occurring during sleep. Mandibular movements have the capability of identifying microarousals, respiratory efforts, apneas, and hypopneas. This has been developed during a European project with a Belgian company, Sunrise, and also some collaboration with Imperial College London. This is a validation study comparing the classical way to diagnose sleep apnea with polysomnography. You remember the complex method in laboratory and the very simple sensor supported by artificial intelligence. And we have published results in a significant number of patients in JAMA Network Open this year. And as you can see on the slide, mandibular movement and artificial intelligence in combination demonstrated a very good accuracy for diagnosing moderate to severe sleep apnea syndrome. So in period of pandemic, we can use this single sensor supported by artificial intelligence to avoid delays for sleep apnea. There are other techniques, and this is the example of the patch one. This is a fully disposable home sleep test provided by Itamar. Itamar is a medical Israeli company, and you can see the oximeter. This is connected, this is single use. There is a smartphone application associated. And just to have a look on the impact of the pandemic, you can see a patient recorded at home with the disposable system, a direct connection with the physician, and automated analysis. And you can see that during the pandemic, 10,000 of WatchPat devices have been sold in few months, reflecting the needs to have new tools supported by automation and artificial intelligence to continue to diagnose sleep apnea and to care patients during the COVID-19 pandemic. The last topic is related to a treatment of sleep apnea. You remember that 1 billion people is suffering from sleep apnea. The first line treatment is CPAP, continuous positive airway pressure. We are using a mask and a device to push pressure inside the upper airway to reopen the upper airway, and there is potentially a risk of virus spread. The interest of CPAP telemonitoring, this is like a connected device providing every night information about adherence and also regarding residual events, leaks, etc., to healthcare providers and also to physicians with a direct access to individual data. Just to show you an example, we have published in 2019 a paper using this big data analysis of CPAP telemonitoring in 2.6 million people in the US. And we were able to demonstrate a very good adherence with this treatment. The adherence was not the same in the different states of the US, reflecting a different access to care and different numbers of sleep labs in the different states in the US. This tool is very interesting during the pandemic COVID-19 because you can identify in very good adherent people the occurrence of COVID-19 infection. These are 6 examples of different patients. You can see night after night good adherence, and abruptly there is a stop to use CPAP, reflecting cough, reflecting difficulty to breathe, and at the end hospitalization for COVID-19. So there is certainly a potential to use this connected device in sleep apnea, CPAP treated patients to identify new COVID-19 infections. So to conclude and to summarize, during a lockdown and during confinement, there is a COVID-somnia in some individuals with significant changes in sleep pattern, and we can improve the knowledge using innovative technologies and artificial intelligence. To maintain sleep care during the pandemic crisis, we have developed and we continue to develop very innovative sensors, limited number of sensors related to artificial intelligence to improve scoring and diagnosis reliability to maintain sleep care during the pandemic. And there is also a potential to use a treatment device and specifically a CPAP device for early detection of COVID-19 infection using CPAP telemonitoring. So thank you very much for your invitation, and happy to address the questions.
Thanks, Professor Pepin, for really your clear and interesting presentation. Personally, I've learned a lot about sleeping and so on. For our second presentation, we will have 2 speakers. Professor Ilan Shelef from Soroka Hospital and Dr. Tammy Ricklin-Raviv from Ben-Gurion University. Professor Ilan Shelef is a radiologist and Vice Dean of the Health Science Faculty at Ben-Gurion University. He is the head of Diagnostic Imaging Institute at Soroka University Medical Center and the president of the Israel Radiological Association. His main research interests are biomedical image analysis, neuroradiology, metabolic syndrome imaging, and cyber and imaging. Dr. Tammy Ricklin-Raviv is a faculty member at the School of Electrical and Computer Engineering of Ben-Gurion University. Her main research interests are biomedical image analysis, computer vision, and machine learning. She is an associate editor at the IEEE Translation on Medical Imaging Journal, a handing editor of the Neuroimage Journal, and a member at the IEEE Bioimaging and Signal Technical Committee. Professor Shelef and Dr. Ricklin-Raviv, we are really wondering how deep learning can be used for fast COVID-19 detection and disease progress prediction from thoracic CT scans. Their presentation will be first by a video where the presentation have been recorded, and then by some words said by Dr. Tammy Ricklin at the end. We are beginning with the presentation of the video of Professor Shelef and Dr. Ricklin-Raviv.
Good afternoon. My name is Tammy Ricklin-Raviv, and I'm a senior lecturer at the Electrical and Computer Engineering School of Ben-Gurion University. We will present today our joint work on deep learning for COVID-19 pneumonia detection and disease progress prediction. This is a joint work with Professor Ilan Shelef of the Soroka Medical Center.
Hello, I'm Professor Ilan Shelef. I'm the head of the Diagnostic Imaging Institute at Soroka Medical Center. Soroka Medical Center, University Medical Center is a general hospital in Beersheba, Israel. It's a very large hospital and serves the south part of Israel and approximately 1 million residents in the Negev. Soroka is the second largest hospital in Israel with more than 2,000 beds. It is a teaching hospital affiliated to the Faculty of Health Sciences, and we are collaborating with Dr. Tammy Ricklin for many years. So Soroka is very busy during this COVID-19 pandemic. We have more than 754 patients. We ventilated 67 of them. Unfortunately, 87 died. We have a very busy emergency room, actually the busiest in Israel, with more than 10,000 visits at our COVID emergency room and 4,000 visits at our pediatric emergency room. We prepare more than 500 beds for COVID patients and more than 150 intensive care beds. So in order to take care of this huge population with COVID, and because of the dangers of contamination to the other population, we open a tent in our emergency room with all the facilities inside, including imaging. Next slide, please. We opened a COVID department, which is a very stressful situation for our team. And we developed, like in other parts of the world, a remote control imaging and remote control panel in order to take care of the patient without and by reducing the dangers to the team. Because each time the team is going into this department, you have to take care and to put all the masks and gloves and all the issue. We are also using a remote control robot to communicate with the patient. So it is a very, very stressful and busy situation for the hospital, and therefore we have to develop an AI tools in order to help us. So several chest CT findings have been reported in more than 70% of the positive PCR COVID-19 cases, and the most important is a ground glass opacities. Chest imaging is not indicated as a screening test for COVID-19 or in asymptomatic patient. It's only indicated in patients with moderate to severe respiratory symptoms. And even in this situation, it's a very busy and heavy duty to our radiology department. It is very important that a negative chest CT examination does not exclude COVID-19. And it is important to realize that CT is not the standard diagnosis of COVID-19. It is being used as part of the clinical setup. And it is crucial to correlate the CT finding with the epidemiological clinical presentation and the PCR test, of course. And all this can be done with the help of the AI. Tammy? So we started our study, and we have a multi-center repository for COVID-19 in Israel. It is a nationwide, and we have all the data about the patient, imaging and clinical. Again, it's a multi-center study, and we already have the Helsinki approved for this study.
My team collaborates with Professor Shelef and his group. We are in charge of the AI part. AI enables fast and automatic extraction of quantitative measures related to COVID-19 pneumonia based on lung imaging. These measures allow us to support clinical decision, compare follow-up scans, assess pneumonia severity and progress, and predict disease progression. Here you can see two images, one CT, one X-ray. Both are pneumonia patients due to COVID-19. So texture and structure are better observed using CT. However, X-ray imaging is much more prevalent. So at this talk and in this part of the research, we concentrate on CT imaging analysis using deep learning. However, in the future, we aim to apply our method to X-ray imaging analysis. AI allows us to automatically locate, separate, and provide volumetric measures of healthy lung tissues, ground glass opacities, and consolidation. You may notice that it is not easy to distinguish between GGO and consolidation, and also between GGO and healthy lung tissues. Even human experts may have difficulties doing so, and this is a source of disagreement. Using AI, we aim to partition the image domain into the GGO consolidation healthy lung tissues in an automatic manner. We use supervised deep learning. We already developed a deep convolutional neural network. In the training phase, the system is presented with CT images, and then we use expert radiologists in order to label our images, that is, to provide segmentation of the different regions. We then use a neural network and pairs of CT images and corresponding labels to train the network. At the inference phase, the network is presented with new CT images, not the training data, and provide in an automatic manner segmentation of the opacities and the healthy lung tissues. In fact, we use hierarchical neural network. So, in the first phase, we segment the regions of the lungs from the other areas. And then in the second phase, in an end-to-end manner, we segment the consolidation, the GGO, and the healthy lung tissues. We use an ensemble of deep neural network. That is, since each network is randomly initialized, it provides slightly different segmentation. We use the average of this segmentation in order to generate a better segmentation. And then we use the ensemble in order to generate a measure of segmentation uncertainty. We aim to use the data collected at the Soroka Hospital and other centers in Israel. However, for now, I will exemplify our method using data publicly available. So for the training data, we used 100 annotated slices of volumetric scans of 100 patients. The test data is different than the training. We use 8 volumes of different patients, altogether making up 587 slices. The test data was annotated by 2 different raters. Here you can see an example. So the opacity segmentation in green is provided by rater 1. Rater 2 provided the opacity here, segmentation marked in purple. And here you can see the inter-rater variability. So in red is the consensus between the raters, in green and purple, the regions of disagreement. Now, on the first column, you can see the ensemble prediction, the automatic segmentation provided by the neural network ensemble. We use the column map to mark segmentation uncertainty. So in red, you can see regions with high confidence, and in yellow, green, and blue, regions with less confidence, with higher uncertainty. Compare these ensemble prediction with the inter-rater variability. You can see some more segmentation result in a visual manner. So on the left column, CT images. On the right, segmentation of rater 1. So rater 1 partitioned the image into condensation and GGO, GGO in light blue, condensation in light yellow. You compare this segmentation with the network ensemble prediction of the segmentation. On the first column, I present the segmentation uncertainty provided by our network ensemble. And then you can compare this with the inter-rater variability. Now, in order to quantitate the results, we use quantitative similarity measure. Let's assume that A is a segmentation provided by the rater. It is considered as the ground truth. Now, B is a segmentation provided by our network. We would like to have measures of overlaps between A and B. So we use a die score. So higher score, higher corresponding is closer to 1, where lower correspondence or 0 correspondence correspond to 0. We also use sensitivity and specificity to identify opacity regions that were correctly identified and healthy tissue regions that are correctly identified. Obviously, we can mark the entire image domain as opacity, but then the specificity will be 0. So there is a trade-off between sensitivity and specificity, and we would like them to be closer to 1. So here you can see the results. On the left part of the table, the GGO segmentation result, and on the right side, the consolidation segmentation results. Now you can see the comparison of our proposed segmentation with rater 1 here in light orange. Compare these numbers to the segmentation or the overlap between rater 1 and rater 2. The numbers are similar. Now you can see the GGO volume estimation. GAL mark rater 1, web rater 2, PRED is the prediction provided by our neural network ensemble. The numbers are similar, so our volume estimation of the GGO is quite similar to that of the raters. Here you can see consolidation volume estimation. The same, GAL rater 1, web rater 2, PRED is our prediction by the automatic neural network. You can see that, again, the numbers are more or less similar. So at this phase, you ask yourself, so what's next? We already developed a deep neural network ensemble that can partition the image domain into opacities and healthy lung tissues. Now, having this segmentation and the original image, along with some other clinical measures, smoking habit, gender, age, whatever, we can do a quantitative severity assessment and do prediction of the disease progression. On behalf of Professor Shelf and myself, we would like to thank the Ministry of Science and Technology for funding this project. Thank you. That a French group is doing similar research, and we would be more than happy to collaborate with them. Our emphasis was partitioning the opacities into 2 different kinds of tissues and making some emphasis on the uncertainty while struggling with a low number of scans during the training, which was a great challenge. While the French group provided some very interesting results on the disease progression and severity assessment. So I guess at this point, we can complete each other research, and we will be more than happy to collaborate. I guess my colleague, Professor Shelf, would like to add a few sentences.
Ilan?
Ilan?
Maybe Ilan is not with. Yes, he is here.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, I must say that all the studies were very impressive from France, but I have to admit that Tammy is doing wonderful things with very few cases. But we are going to enlarge a number of cases because it's going to be a multi-center of all over Israel, and we already approved for it. Like in the previous session, we are also going to add clinical to the imaging data. In Israel, it will be very difficult to do so many CTs to all patients coming to the emergency room, because other cases, it will be very difficult to do the imaging studies to the other patient. And I'm the head of the imaging department for all the cases. So I think it's what we are going to do is to try to use these CT scans that we have already done to trying to pull out data from chest X-ray, which is a very relevant study that we are doing for many cases, and we know that it's not very accurate, but maybe to teach the X-rays through the CT will give us some more data. And again, as Tammy said, we will be very happy to collaborate with the French people. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now we have some questions and answers that we will receive. But before this, I would like to say that maybe the COVID-19 is accelerating the hospital of future, but I'm sure that it would accelerate also the partnership between France and Israel, and this was the objective of this webinar. Now, I received two questions for Ilan and Tammy. What is the time to recover data from the city for one particular person? And another one, it is possible to make a correlation between a city and a classical endurance test.
Again, between city and
a classical endurance test. I don't know what is endurance test, but maybe you know better than me.
So I assume that this was what I mentioned before to do. This is a very big challenge, but to do correlation between the X-ray and the CT, we know that the CT is much more accurate. However, the X-ray is much more available everywhere and very fast. So it is going to be a very big AI challenge to do the correlation between the X-ray and the CT.
Okay, and the first question was, what is the time to recover data from the city?
The city is at our hospital, for example, is not very available for every cases that coming into the emergency room, because again, the emergency room is extremely busy, the busiest in Israel, and it's continued to be so even through the first wave. The second, once we do have the data, the first interpretation of the radiologist, which is not really quantified, is quite fast. But if we want to do a very meticulous study with quantified data, so this is taking hours. And this is also another issue that you must have available radiologists in order to annotate all the study. It's a time-consuming, a very huge issue of doing the study and giving the results to Tammy.
Okay, thank you, Ilan. I just received a question to Professor Pepin. Did sleep is more important pandemic time than in usual time? Professor Pepin?
Yes. Can you repeat the question? I didn't answer.
Yes. Did sleep is more important in pandemic time than in usual time?
Sleep is always important, even crucial. But during pandemic, it's really important to control your sleep schedule, because if you have poor sleep quality, you have less protection against the pandemic, and you can gain weight, have some more depression, anxiety, etc. So it is really crucial to have a look on sleep quality during the pandemic.
Okay, thank you. This is the end of our second panel, and then we are moving on to our third panel. Well, our third panel is now dedicated on artificial intelligence technology for the benefit of COVID-19, where two companies will present their activities. Our first speaker is Mrs. Maya Orliki from Diagnostic Robotics. Maya Orliki is a seasoned executive experienced in shaping business strategy and operations for global companies with sector expertise in the medical and healthcare industries. Maya is the Vice President of Strategy and Operation at Diagnostic Robotics, where she leads the team responsible for the company's growth strategy, business development, and product roadmap. Mrs. Orlicki, we are very interested by the means implemented by diagnostic robotics to fight the COVID-19 pandemic. Please present your presentation.
Hello, everyone. Very nice to meet you all. Happy to be here. Let me just share my screen. You see my screen? Great. So I'm gonna share a bit of our work and what we've done in light of COVID-19. So just a brief overview about diagnostic robotics. So as mentioned, I'm the VP Strategy and Operations. The founders of the company are Jonathan Amir, our CEO, Dr. Kira Rodinsky, our CTO, and Professor Moshe Shoham. And we have a very distinguished medical advisory board of professors and physicians from Harvard, Stanford, and Mayo Clinic. We're above 100 people of employees, data scientists, engineers, and physicians. And overall, we're working in order to leverage AI to fight the most pressing clinical and financial challenges in healthcare. So overall, we are relying on different sources of data for our models. We have about 4 million visits from ED, about 73 million visits from HMOs, and then about 60 billion of claims data. And we've started with our systems from building a clinically validated triage system inside the emergency department in order to better optimize wait lines and streamline the process across the ED departments. From there, we've expanded our products, and we're working on two different areas. One is everything around AI-augmented home-based triage. So we've expanded the work we've done in the ED in order to provide medical setting navigation and to streamline the intake process prior to a physician's visit. And in addition, we've focused on population health AI solutions. So what we've done during COVID is we've collaborated with the Ministry of Health in Israel during the first wave in order to help monitor and assess the risk level of the citizens for COVID-19 and provided monitoring on a daily basis to the entire population. So this was relevant, especially to the first wave, which is the time in which we collaborated with the Ministry of Health, but we really wanted to understand the trends of the outbreak, and therefore it helped the government to have better decisions on sort of gradual cities. So here you can see sort of the progression and the trends that we've explored. What we did was we leveraged our technological assets, and patients received an intuitive triage questionnaire that we've adopted using our clinical team and a broad team that was a combination of people from the Ministry of Health and different healthcare institutes within Israel in order to provide a questionnaire and better assess the symptoms and the risk assessment for COVID. The healthcare providers could then monitor the assessment across the entire panel and to identify patients that are at high risk, as you can see here with sort of the red flags, in order to do outreach and treatment for those specific individuals. So the flow is essentially pretty simple, and we've worked with both providers and health systems in order to leverage this. So it's initiated from either the patient or the health system. The provider in Israel, the HMO, sent a link essentially asking for daily screening, trying to identify the symptoms. Then if it's a no, so it's an all clear recommendation. If it's a yes, so then the providers gets the notification, as you saw, and was able to outreach and discuss with the patients the next steps. So during the first wave of the pandemics, our goal was really to benefit the population in order to provide a simple and easy and intuitive way to do self-assessment and monitoring and improve adherence to public health guidelines. We wanted to support the health systems to reduce the strain on the health system, to make sure that they can leverage and discuss with the people who are really at a highest risk for COVID, and build sort of the streamlined process according to that, and to help the government have an overall view of the broader population and conditions and the symptoms related to COVID. So the questionnaire was distributed across Israel, and we had 25% of the population that answered the questionnaire at least once. A lot of them did more than once, and then 83% completion rate to the questionnaire. During the first wave, the government was able to have gradual decisions. So, for example, we identified higher risks, such as Tiberia, Ashkelon, several cities within Israel. And then the government was able to provide sort of actions for those specific places in order to prevent the pandemic from spreading even further. So as I mentioned, some of the key advantage, so the ability to sort of have a global view of the population. We've collaborated with Rhode Island states in the US and are now in discussions with several other states. We've leveraged the system through a collaboration we've had with Salesforce in India. And the idea is really to, before the pandemic has spread, so again, relevant especially to the sort of first wave, really looking at where are the highest risks area? What are we seeing in terms of the symptoms on a daily basis? It was channel agnostic, so we could do it through mobile, text, different channels, whatever is the easiest, and we have sort of a multiple support. So we did it in English, Spanish, Portuguese, etc. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maya. And now our second speaker is Dr. Quentin Perron from IKTOS, IKTOS. Dr. Quentin Perron is a medicinal chemist by training. He holds a PhD in organometallic chemistry from the University of Geneva. In 2016, with his business partner, Yann Gaston Maté and Nicolas Deroux, he co-founded IKTOS, a startup company developing AI technology from new drug design. He is now the chief scientific officer of the company. Dr. Perron, we are wondering how artificial intelligence techniques used by IKTOS will help for the discovery of novel SARS-CoV-2 inhibitors. Please, Dr. Perron.
Thank you very much for your kind introduction. Let me share my screen. Is it okay on your side?
Yes, please. Go on.
Okay, so a few words about IKTOS. We are a company expert in artificial intelligence applied to organic chemistry. So our goal is to find drugs faster using AI. So it's the first technology we are using is deep generative models for de novo drug design. And once you have identified ideal in silico compounds, you also at the same time need to find ways to make that compound in a very easy way. So for that, we have designed another technology, another AI technology, which is called SPIA. It's for retrosynthetic analysis. So as you can see, we have several types of customers, from small biotech to big pharma. And we are delivering our service either through service mode or research collaboration and also software licensing. And today we're going to talk about our collaboration with Stanford Research Institute and how we can couple AI and robotics to make drugs faster. So we are focusing on what is called it to lead, where the journey to find a drug is very long. It takes many years. It costs a lot, around 2 billion euros. And you have very few chances at the end of this journey to find molecules. And we are focusing in this part of the search process from molecules which was like interesting, but still not active enough, not selective, not stable, maybe partially toxic, the hit to lead phase is trying to transform that molecules into a preclinical candidate. Very active molecules, stable, soluble, etc. And this is, very difficult task, because once you optimize the activity, you lose on the solubility. Once you optimize the solubility, you lose on the activity. So it's like a Rubik's Cube, and it takes a lot of time. So one thing which is very important into that process is what is called the design, make, test cycle. So you design molecule, you think about it, you make it, and then you have to test that molecules. And this design, make, test cycle has to be as fast as possible. Currently, designing molecules take a month because you have to think about it, compare the data, analyze the data, and then you have to make it, go to the lab, mix the reagents, make that molecules, and then once the molecules is ready, to send it for test. And it takes, quite some time. So why it takes some time? As I explained, at the beginning of the process, you have an active molecules, which is not maximizing all the endpoints. Then you think about those molecules, you synthesize, you test it, you analyze the data. And this process takes some time. And after 100 molecules, you arrive on, one molecule, which is active, but maybe not, and stable, but maybe not specific, not soluble, etc. So you do that process again and again. So you are doing design, make, test cycle several times. It takes a lot of time, and cost, of course, increase along that way. And at the end of the process, it's very hard to have a molecule which maximize all the endpoints simultaneously. So you always have some 1 or 2 endpoints which are above the threshold. And you have to ask yourself, should I go or not? Because you have spent so much money that at a certain point you have to take that decision. So sometimes it's better to stop here, and sometimes you want to go further because you have spent so much money. And this is very costly, long and inefficient process, very inefficient way to explore the chemical space. Currently, the chemists, to accelerate this design, make, test cycle, they have database of past synthesized molecules, they have pharmacological results, they have molecule in stocks, and they try to think about how to make, which going to be the next molecule to make using data visualization, machine learning, computational chemistry. They are also using their know-how to think how to make that compounds by comparing what have been done before, going to catalog of providers. So half of the time of the chemist is spent in imaging molecules, find a way to make them, and ordering the starting material. So thanks to Macchia and Spire, we have shrink this part of the process, the design process, because now we have database, you have database of molecules, still the same database, but thanks to our AI, Macchia has fully automated the way we design molecules. And Spire has fully automatized the way we think about how to make that molecules. So what about Macchia? Macchia is a software where you are able to drag and drop your data. You have molecule in rows, and in columns, you have the endpoint you want to optimize: activity, solubility, stability. With all the biological results you have been able to gather during the course of your project. So you just put this data into the machine, into the software, and then you define for each objective the threshold you want to reach. For instance, on activity, you want to be higher than 7 pKi. On solubility, you want to be below -4 log S, etc., etc. So you define which range, which level you want to achieve on a given objective. And then you click on play, and the algorithm will, through our AutoML, auto machine learning system, the algorithm will build models to be able to predict for new molecules if this molecule is going to be active, soluble, stable. So everything in silico. So this is the first part of the algorithm, how to make prediction of a molecule. So this is called QSAR models, quantitative structure activity relationship models. This is well-known technology, but we have automatized everything. And then this is the AI part actually, which arrive here is once you have those models, you ask the AI to find the molecules which are going to fix all the objectives simultaneously automatically. So the algorithm think about molecules, interrogate the models, and based on the results of the models, it will think about a new batch of molecules. So iteratively, and we call that reinforcement learning, the algorithm is generating compound, interrogate the model, generating compound, interrogate the model, and at the end of the process, it takes from minutes to hours, depending on the difficulty of the optimization of all the tasks. It ends up to ideal in silico compound, maximizing all the endpoint of the project. So all those molecules, which is an example, a demo data set, all those molecules are predicted good on all the objective of the project in silico. So our platform, as I said, is based on, the heart of the AI is reinforcement learning. So we have a generative AI, generative model, which has been trained on public database of molecules. This algorithm is able to automatically design new molecules. And then we have predictors. We don't want to design molecules by random. We want to design molecules which are gonna optimize external fitness function. As I said, it can be 2D QSAR models extracted from the project database. It can be simulation-based algorithm like 3D QSAR, docking, free energy calculation, molecular dynamics. Also, it can be a retrosynthetic score because, again, when we generate compounds, we want to make sure that those compounds are going to be feasible. And you can, of course, incorporate generic score. So our platform takes a lot of information, in silico information, and design automatically molecules which are going to be easy to make. Our AI for synthetic access is called, again, Spire. I won't go through the detail because it's a complex technology. We have performed a webinar before. So if you tape Spire retrosynthesis on YouTube, you will be able to have access to a full demonstration of the algorithm and the technology. But basically, we have trained an AI based on reaction database, starting material database, to perform the task of a chemist is able to do. If you provide a molecule to a chemist, he will tell you, okay, to make that molecule, you should mix this and this, then isolate that compound and make this plus this, like making a cake, for instance. But here the algorithm make that automatically, taking advantage of the full reaction database. We have been able to train organic chemistry to an AI. Our technology is freely available on the web. It's at spire.ai. So it's very, very simple. You just create an account. You provide your email address, a password, you receive a link, and then you are able to impute or draw molecules. And the algorithm will tell you how to make that molecules. That's why we call that retrosynthesis, because you start from the input and then step by step, you tell the user how you will make that molecules until you end up to commercially available starting material. So basically you buy that compounds, you make a reaction to obtain that compounds, you buy these compounds, you mix those two, you obtain that. And you buy also these compounds and you mix this one and you obtain this one. So it's like a recipe. So back to the DMT cycle, design, make, test. As I showed you, we have automatized the design parts. Again, we have project data, external score, and we couple Machia and Spire to generate automatically easy to make molecules, which optimize those score. Now, what about the make part, which is very difficult actually? So can we accelerate and automatize also the chemistry? So this is a big question because chemistry is like art, it's like cooking, and it requires a lot of skills. If you want to make a reaction, just the one I showed you in the Spire tree, just to mix two products, it takes some time. So you have to set up your experiment in the wet lab, put the material in place, mix the product, launch a reaction, then you have to monitor this reaction to make sure that the reaction is over. And then you have the workup. So you have to extract the product, clean the phase, aqueous, organic phase, evaporate the solvents, and then you have to purify that compounds. If you want to have at the end a solid, a powder, which is ready to be engaged into the next reaction. And this takes a lot of times, a lot of manual work. So the other half part of the chemist is to work in the lab making those molecules. So half part of the job thinking about some molecules, and the other part of the job is to make those molecules. So our vision and the platform we are thinking about, and we are starting to collaborate with Stanford Research Institute, is to make a fully automatic DMT cycle. Again, design part is already done at Ictos. Automatically, in less than 1 week, we can generate new ideas, and every week we generate new ideas based on the previous data. And the make parts, thanks to the Symphony platform from Stanford Research Institute, as you can see, is chemistry, it's flow chemistry. It's a complex device which take reagents, mix everything, and monitor and isolate compounds and engage it into another step. We call that flow chemistry. And they are able to make molecules in less than 2 weeks, and then just test to external providers. So as you can see, our goal is to accelerate research by making all that design make test fully automatic. So we are convinced that AI and automatic synthesis can bring major gains in the DMT cycle. So we have applied, and we are currently working with Stanford to accelerate the discovery of new SARS-CoV-2 inhibitors, especially on the NSPV15 targets, which has been shown that by inhibiting NSP15, we would attenuate the virulence of the COVID. So we are currently working on that project. This is not vaccines, this is small drugs. It takes time, so don't expect to have a medication at the end of this year or maybe next year. It's a long journey, as I explained, because we are starting really from the beginning, trying to find new molecules and optimizing again these targets. And in best case scenario, maybe in 3 to 4 years, we can expect to have a preclinical candidate. So keep posted. And so collaboration is underway, and we hope that we will be able to have good news in the coming years. So we believe that speeding drug discovery is critical, as we can see currently with this COVID and many other diseases. Actually, there are, the spotlight is on COVID currently, but there are many diseases we have to treat and find drugs as soon as possible. And we are convinced, as I say, that AI and robotics can play a major role in that upcoming revolution. So if this presentation gives you ideas and ways we could collaborate together, so please let us know, and we will be more than happy to find ways to develop great technology. Thank you very much for your kind intention, and please feel free to ask questions.
Thank you, Dr. Perron. We received now 2 questions. One to Mrs. Maya Orliki. Can you give some information about the diagnostic robotics digital risk assessment and monitoring platform for COVID-19 used in Israel or somewhere else in other country? Maya? Can you, we are not, you have to open your micro.
Yeah, okay, it was locked.
Yeah,
there we go. Sure, happy to share a bit more information. So what we've done is essentially we received all the data from the population from self-screening, and we tried to really look at the different symptoms and see the correlation between the symptoms and between COVID-19. And I can share with you, maybe this will help. So for example, what we saw was, as we were looking at the different symptoms, so this was the first wave, right? So it was before, for example, it was very much known, what's now really very much known, that actually we discovered that the loss of a sense or smell or taste had the highest correlation to COVID. This was in the beginning where people thought that, you know, fever was the highest indication. So what we've done was we gathered a lot of data from the entire population, and we looked at the different symptoms and tracked the probability and their indications to COVID. And this is sort of a more in-depth, right? So we had a lot of symptoms from different people. We leveraged that to look to try and better forecast the risk assessment to COVID based on the correlations that we're seeing through the different symptoms.
Okay, thank you very much. To Dr. Perron, a question. Well, I am reading the question, right? I have the feeling that there are too many meters in your generic approach in order to reach a development. Can you comment?
Too many what?
Parameters.
Yeah, there are many parameters you mean parameters regarding having a drug which maximize all the objectives, right?
This is what I understood, from the question.
Because, to have molecules inject to human, you have to make sure that this molecule is soluble, stable, non-toxic, permeable. If you want to target the brain, you have to pace the blood-brain barrier. So you have many objectives to optimize simultaneously. This is like a Rubik's cube with 25 faces. So it's quite hard and quite complex. That's why it costs so many. It costs so much, and it takes so much time to find new drugs.
Okay, so thank you very much for our two speakers. Very interesting. Now we are going to the panel number 4, which is totally different to what we hear at this moment. The panel is discussing about the impact and the implication of the COVID-19 pandemic on Israeli and French societies. And we will have two different conferences, but I think complementary. Our first presentation, we will have two speakers. Mrs. Melissa Roy from University of Ottawa and Mr. Fernando Garlic-Politis from Paris University. Melissa Roy from the French Institute COVID Ad Memoriam is a PhD candidate at the School of Social Work of the University of Ottawa. Her research interest and experience related to epidemic narratives, otherness figures, health communication strategy, and social media. Fernando Garlic-Politis also from the French Institute COVID Ad Memoriam is a PhD candidate at the Centrale Population and Development of the Institut de Recherche pour le Développement in Paris. And his research interest and experience relate to humanitarian crisis, sanitary crisis, political discourse, and social media. They will now make a presentation and about their research about anti-Semitism on social networks. So Melissa and Fernando, please, you can beginning your presentation, please.
Hi, thank you for having us. So our study is funded by the French National Agency for Scientific Research, and it was implemented by a team that was based at the University of Paris. And this research is really located at the crossroad of sociology of epidemics and the ethnography of online social networks. Our interest lies in figures of blame that emerge online during epidemics, as underlined in a recent article in The Lancet that was entitled Tracking Online Heroization and Blame in Epidemics. So in the first part of the presentation, I'm going to contextualize the research and highlight our objectives, and then my colleague Fernando will present the methodology and highlight the results. So generally speaking, dynamics of blame are often present during epidemics as the public attempts to make sense of the event by scrutinizing human actions that could have led to the propagation of the disease. And regardless of where blame is directed, it is a recurring feature in the history of epidemics. So classic examples include the 4H designation for Haitians, homosexuals, heroin users, and hemophiliacs blamed for HIV/AIDS during the 80s and 90s. And we can also think of accusations directed towards New York's Chinatown community for SARS. During epidemics, some social groups become iconic figures of blame as they become scapegoats and are perpetually blamed one epidemic after the next by different groups. So for this, one can think of African figures that are accused for cholera, HIV/AIDS, Ebola. And this is precisely what we have been looking at during H1N1 epidemics in France, and then Ebola, and now again in France for COVID-19. So to begin, our team's 2015 research on H1N1 in France that was entitled Blood Libel Rebooted showed that social media do not intrinsically change accusatory patterns during epidemics, but rather serve as new channels for discriminatory and blame that are directed at recurring figures. So this 2015 research underlined a subterranean discourse about the putative origins and objectives of the H1N1 virus, which was absent from discussions in mainstream TV channels and large circulation print media. These online rumors attributed hidden motives to governments, pharmaceutical companies, and otherness figures that were scapegoated in the social history of previous European epidemics, notably Freemasons and Jewish figures. This research also showed that the use of specific forms of social media enabled what we call the laundering of dirty information that might otherwise have stayed in the gray zone of obscure and underground blogs. And then secondly, our team's study on accusatory discourse circulating online during the recent Ebola outbreak continued with this analysis of patterns of accusations on social media. And our research highlighted a localized blame tendency, and that is the tendency to blame groups with whom one has pre-existing social relations. So we showed in this study that some American social media users accused Mexicans of constituting a potential public health threat, blaming them for potentially bringing Ebola to North America, although the disease was not present in Mexico. So we underlined that accusation was framed within a specific political discourse in which Mexicans were accused of illegally crossing the southern border and bringing social problems such as drugs, arms trafficking, tuberculosis to US. So accordingly, these othering discourses and practices rearticulate pre-existing beliefs, prejudice, and politics of frustrations. So the research we present today is a prolongation of these studies, which show that old stories are perpetuated via new vehicles, which are social media. And we are interested in the laundering of anti-Semitic discourse online during COVID-19 and how what we call borderline information is transformed into explicitly heinous discourses. So borderline information is any discourse that is not explicitly racist or anti-Semitic, but can be easily used, interpreted, or reinterpreted to serve a racist agenda. So it is information that borders the limit of what is acceptable on internet. And more specifically, we compare how the borderline content on an open and easily accessible website is reappropriated and made explicit and transformed into heinous discourse prohibited by French law on a closed social network. So a closed social network is a private community where individuals know one another, recognize one another, quote one another, and entertain a common ideology, fostering a sort of echo chamber that is relatively exclusive. So I will let my colleague continue on.
In the context of our study, the chosen closed network is VKontakte, the Russian equivalent of Facebook. This network is considered close for two main reasons. First, we notice a recognition of central personalities. There's a mutual recognition between users and a relation between the profile we studied. For example, when a user is blocked by another, he asks for the help of other members of the network. The second reason relates to the allegiance to anti-Semitic discourse. Users' understanding of an event or an information is a vector for their acceptance or rejection in the community. Users who question or are perceived as having a faulty interpretation are rejected. As such, this network is a closed space, not because it restricts the entrance of new members, but more so because it managed a community that is loyal by the information that emerged within it. Consequently, criticism are disregarded and the community is preserved. We chose VK because as we started looking at many of the most recognized websites in the extreme right-wing social media in France, which since the beginning of the pandemic until the deconfinement have seen its traffic rebound, comments on their websites recommended sharing the platform's content on the social network VK. Contrary to Facebook, VK has no representation or headquarters in France. Moreover, we did not find any information regarding regulation of the network between the French authorities and the company. Thus, VK had been chosen as a preferred network due to its weak management of hate speech in France. Data collected in relation to anti-Semitism and the COVID-19 pandemic was compiled between February 28, 2020 and June 16, 2020 from the 3 profiles whose publication attract most viewers. The initial date of the study corresponds to the first reaction relating the pandemic and anti-Semitism in France. The final date was determined a few weeks before the closure of an account of a highly recognized user on YouTube on July 6, and then on VK July 9, because of its violent content. These accounts were closed following the enactment of a law in France against hate speech on social media, the Avia law, on June 24th. Plus, on July 6th, French courts convicted a recognized anti-Semitic figure, and the same day, 2 YouTube channels related to anti-Semitism were also closed for, I quote, repeated violation of the platform's terms of use. These last 3 events probably had an impact on VK's moderation policy, since in the following weeks, the profiles of several other anti-Semitic accounts were closed. At this point, some VK profiles recommended migrating to other networks, such as BitChute or Gap, where it is still possible to share content now considered illegal by the moderation and censorship policy on VK. So we started a sample of 249 publications and 1,075 comments on VK. From this total sample of 1,324 posts on VK, 403 comments were manually rejected. These comments were irrelevant discussions between commentators, for example, repetition, spam, or statements diverging from the subject of anti-Semitism. Thus, 921 posts, and more specifically, 249 posts and 672 comments were analyzed. One of the main results of our study is a specific chronology of online anti-Semitism in France during the pandemic. We divided the temporal sequel of the anti-Semitic discourse on VK during the pandemic in France into 3 stages. The first, from February 28 to March 30, when the accumulation of polemics around health management in France fits a sentiment of suspicion towards a so-called Jewish community. The second period, from March 30 to the end of April, is characterized by the creation of an enemy through the lenses of anti-Semitic history. The third period is from beginning of May to June 14. Here, a link is established between an international patriotic political movement and anti-Semitic statement towards Jewish figures in the area of health management in France. This kind of targeted politicization involves accusing Jewish personalities of everything and is never interested in the evolution of the virus or how to deal with it. The second result of the study relates to information laundering. We understand information laundering as the act of converting misleading information into accusations to place them in a network where this discourse can circulate legally within the platform policies, but against French legislation. Now we will focus on each element of the information laundering. The first one, converting misleading information into accusations. Data arriving on VK escapes moderation, so the blame can be deployed without any restraints. As a result, the articles that are shared on VK lose track of information, and the remaining piece of content is often formulated as a reprehensible or worthy of condemnation. For example, an article published in the Journal of Montreal entitled, "In Israel, the ultra-Orthodox Ministry of Health under fire," is reproduced in its entirety on a French extreme right-wing website with a rewarded title. I quote, "Israel Contradictions. The Rabbi Minister of Health accused of favoring the pandemic." Then, when this article is published by a user on VK, it is accompanied by the comment, "A cult of freaks that leads the world to the abyss." On VK, users perceive this approach more as a clarification. For example, when user writes in a sarcastic tone the word anti-Semitic, followed by a link to a blog that explains that the world is governed by 8 families. One of the commentators replies to this post saying, "This is information." The second element of the definition of information laundering is to place accusations in a network where this discourse can circulate legally within the platform policies. In the absence of a regulatory framework or contradictors on VK, the profiles that we have studied find a space in an audience adapted to the adversarial approach in this network. The invitation to join VK appears regularly on the website's comments. They say, "Go quickly on VK to discover freedom of expressions," states one user, and he continues, "YouTube is now castrated by these Israeli censors who hunt down the refugees of misguided people." And he concludes, "On VK, we'll screw them." On the same line, another VK user warned, "Those who are not blocked should take advantage of this to rapidly advertise for VK. To destroy Facebook, the boycott is the only effective weapon." Compared to other networks, the flexibility of moderation felt by the VK users encourages accusatory language, which is understood as a freedom of expression. VK becomes more adapted to the violent expressions of certain individuals looking for a format without surveillance or censorship. Hence, VK is presented as a platform that accepts this behavior and where this is not condemned, which brings us to the third and last point of the definition, which is against French legislation. Despite legal prohibitions, the profiles analyzed rely on Nazism as a discursive strategy, and it is the main reference of puns or critics. It is through these references that users interact. For example, 24% of users' total publications collected during our study refers directly to this ideology. In one publication, a user shares a caricature of a train that alludes to the transportation of Jews to concentration camps and writes, "All this will be soon just a detail in history." Another VK user relates censorship as a Jewish ideological tool. Referring to Avia, the deputy at the National Assembly with a bill against hate content on the internet, he publishes, "Avia, little capo of the Jew police." These speeches, openly anti-Semitic on VK, differ from the style of expression used on open news sites. The difference at the origin of two registers of languages make it possible to analyze how information is managed from an open site, recognized as controversial, to a closed network that escapes information management policies. To conclude, COVID-19 and the use of social media, especially closed social media, has allowed us to understand three subjects: One, the reemergence of old trends. Jewish are scapegoated in times of epidemics. The second, the new vehicles of communication, internet, social media, and more specifically, an understudied closed social media such as VK. And finally, the importance and urgency to study the circulation and laundering of dirty information between open news sites and closed social networks, escaping the national legislation about racism and anti-Semitism. Thank you very much for listening to us.
Thank you, Melissa. Thank you, Fernando. Very interesting research that they are doing there. This is my personal opinion. Now we are going to our second speaker of this panel, Professor Sharon Shiovitz Ezra from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Professor Sharon Shiovitz Ezra is an associate professor at the Paul Berwold School of Social Work and Social Welfare at the Hebrew University. She heads the Israel Gerontological Data Center at the Hebrew University. She serves as the country team leader of Israel in the survey of health, aging, and retirement in Europe. Loneliness experience in old age is continuously at the focus of her scientific work. Professor Shiovitz Ezra, we look forward to learning from your rich experience on loneliness in old age, and especially during the COVID-19 pandemic. Sharon, please.
Thank you. Hello all. My name is Professor Sharon Shiovitz Ezra. I'm an associate professor at the Paul Berwold School of Social Work and Social Welfare at the Hebrew University. And in this session, I will present a study that I conducted during the first wave of the COVID-19 outbreak that focused on loneliness among older adults. This study was funded by the Ministry of Science and Technology for COVID-19 studies. The goal of this present study was to investigate loneliness in the shadow of the corona pandemic, focusing on the older population, and examine the contribution of quantitative and qualitative characteristics of the social network during the outbreak on feelings of loneliness. A little bit of a background. Since the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, numerous publications have emphasized the health and medical facets of the coronavirus, but even the measures taken to eradicate the pandemic and to prevent its rapid spread have significant negative effects on health. Policies of prolonged lockdown and social distancing have demanded a reduction of in-person social interactions and social contact, and this may increase loneliness, which has itself been defined as an epidemic that should be reduced and prevented. If I may say, loneliness here before the corona pandemic, it was defined as a pandemic or as an epidemic that should be prevented. What is loneliness? Loneliness is a subjective marker for the lack of meaningful relationships. The evolutionary theory of loneliness approaches it as a painful and aversive signal deriving from the discrepancy between desired and actual social relationships, which motivates people to socially engage and reconnect. In fact, loneliness plays a key role in the evaluation of humanity because reconnection with others is crucial for survival and reproduction. According to this perspective, loneliness is similar to biological needs, such as hunger, in that it creates significant feelings of discomfort that motivate individuals to take action and to eradicate themselves from this painful and distressing experience. What are the consequences of loneliness? There is cumulative evidence of the negative effects of loneliness on health. Studies have stressed the importance of loneliness in predicting disease outcomes in later life, specifically linking loneliness to poor cardiovascular health. A prospective association between loneliness and mortality has been repeatedly reported in the literature. What do we know about loneliness during the COVID-19 outbreak? Studies conducted during the corona do indeed indicate high rates of loneliness in days of lockdown and social avoidance compared to the period preceding the pandemic. Studies from different countries also demonstrate the harmful consequences of loneliness during the epidemic. A positive association was found between loneliness and depressive symptoms and suicidal ideation, just for example. As a gerontologist, I mainly focus on loneliness in old age. Even before the epidemic, the older population is generally vulnerable to experiences of loneliness, as their social circle may deplete owing to relocation or death of members of their social network. Common ageist perceptions that exclude older people from the social arena may also lead to increased loneliness. So the present study examined the phenomenon of loneliness in the shadow of the corona pandemic, focusing on the older population and examining the contribution of diverse, both qualitative and quantitative characteristics of the social network at the time of the outbreak of to feelings of loneliness. Social network characteristics have been found to predict feelings of loneliness in previous studies. The study collected the data through telephone interviews to be able to represent also older people who do not necessarily use digital media. During the pandemic, many studies were based on online service, but because the digital literacy of older people is lower than that of the younger ones, the older people who participated in these studies do not necessarily represent the older population as a whole. So in this study, data was collected from a representative nationwide sample of older Jewish Israelis. The sample size was 507 with the mean age of 70. 44% were women. Most of them were married, but 90% of them were living alone. Most of them have children and grandchildren, more than half with academic education, and almost 70% identified as secular. As I told you before, the data were collected using a telephone questionnaire that was administered between May 1st and the end of May. The study was conducted shortly after the lifting of the strict lockdown that was imposed in March and April of 2020 in Israel. Because the study sought to examine the implications of the lockdown period and of the guidelines that sought to reduce social contact, participants were instructed to refer their responses to the outbreak of the corona epidemic, when people were instructed to stay indoors and not meet other people. Loneliness was measured using a direct question. During the corona epidemic, how often did you feel lonely or loneliness? And the social network was measured using a name-generated method in which people are asked to indicate the names of those with whom they talked about matters that were important to them, good or bad, during the outbreak of the corona epidemic. Following that, participants were asked a series of questions about their confident social network. So if we look at the results, what we can see is that about 28% of the sample reported loneliness during the corona, of whom about 11 reported feelings of loneliness often. When respondents were asked to compare the corona time with the one preceding its eruption, about 40% reported feelings more lonely during the time of the corona pandemic. And if we are looking at the confident network characteristics, we can see that the average size of the closed network was 3.2 close people, with high emotional closeness was reported, and a very high satisfaction from the relationship with the confident network members. The frequency of contact with the confident network indicates a high frequency of contacts by various means. The most frequent means of social interaction during this time appears to have been digital. When we look at the bivariate results, we can see that not married, living alone, women, people with bad health and economic difficulties reported greater loneliness. And also we can see that older people who reported depression and sadness reported also greater loneliness. Looking at the social network, we can see the social interaction with the close network members was associated with lower level of loneliness. So if you have more frequent interaction with your social network, then you report less loneliness. What we can see about when we take it to the multi-level, we can see that living alone and reporting sadness and depression were significantly associated with greater loneliness during the outbreak, and also perceived better health, however, was found to be associated with less loneliness. When we look at the contribution of the network, we can see that frequent telephone contact with network members was associated with less loneliness. The same was found for providing support to members of the confident network, but by contrast, receiving support from network members was associated with greater loneliness. The characteristics of the social network and the background characteristics together explain 40% of the variance of feelings of loneliness during the time of the outbreak and lockdown. Examining age differences in the association between network characteristics and loneliness produced surprising findings. What we can see, and you can see in the graph, although a negative association was found between closeness and satisfaction on one hand and loneliness on the other hand, in the younger group, a positive association was found between these characteristics and loneliness in those age 70 and over. So if we want to summarize the results that we found, as I mentioned, the goal was to focus on the role of the confident social network as a protective factor against loneliness during the time of the epidemic and lockdown. And what we can see from the results is that frequent telephone contact with members of the confident network was associated with less loneliness, and receiving and providing support for members of the confident social network were also found to be associated with loneliness, but in opposite directions. If you look at the age differences in the young group, emotional closeness to the member of the network and satisfaction with the relationship were associated with less loneliness, but an inverse relationship was found in the older group. These differences may be due to the fact that for the older group, which is at a higher risk of suffering from the consequences of COVID-19, and which was therefore asked to reduce social contact as much as possible, even after the lockdown was lifted, the higher the quality of the social ties was, the more their absence in the physical world was felt, and therefore the feelings of loneliness were greater. This study has also some limitations that I should mention. The Arab sector was not included. Arab society is more traditional and family-oriented, and it reports higher rates of loneliness. Therefore, it is important to examine the rates of loneliness among the Arab sector and the role of family and social ties in times of lockdown and epidemic. Another limitation is concerning memory bias in participants who were asked to address the period of the outbreak and of lockdown, although the study was conducted shortly after the restrictions and lockdown were lifted. And finally, the study was a cross-sectional one, and therefore it is difficult to derive causal inference and learn about chronic loneliness as a result of the continued epidemic. So for future research, they should integrate also the Arab sector and should be conducted at several points in time to use longitudinal design to make it possible the examination of loneliness over time and of changes in social networks and the support they provide during a prolonged crisis. Thank you.
Shishovitz, very interesting remark and research. We receive two questions, one to Melissa and Fernando, and the other to Sharon Shiovitz. To Melissa and Fernando, the question is, based on your research, can you say that in a pandemic, there are all the ingredients of anti-Semitism? Fernando, Melissa?
You want to start, Fernando? I can go afterwards.
Okay.
Scurry? Yeah, again, based on your research, can you say that in a pandemic, there are all the ingredients of anti-Semitism?
I think that during the pandemic in France, what we have analyzed is how some sort of climate or context, social political context, makes some reactions that have some style of using the pandemic with one objective, but it's not the pandemic itself that we see that has the ingredients. It's more how users are going to instrumentalize the pandemic so they can have spaces, platforms, and social interaction to encourage this hate speech. So from our research, what we have seen until now is how this information is used on that objective. The pandemic is used for that, and controversies, all the controversial, actions that occurred during the pandemic were used on that sense. But it's not the pandemic itself that is going to encourage anti-Semitism. The anti-Semite people are going to use all the elements that they have. And during the pandemic, the isolation and the lack of information or the controversial actions in France, they accentuate, or they had an effect on how they use those informations.
Okay, thank you. To Professor Shiovitz. Did you think that there is a difference in loneliness if the person is living alone at home or inside a retirement home?
We know that people who live alone are at greater risk for loneliness. I didn't conduct the research in the nursing homes, so it's difficult to compare, but the fact that there are other people around can reduce loneliness. But if we're going to the origins of loneliness, it's a subjective feeling. So it's how the person, how the individual perceives his social network. So for one individual, for one person, it could be good to be in a nursing home and around other people, and for another one is not the ideal setting of living. So I would say that from what we know about living alone, and also in this study, the persons who live alone report greater loneliness. But if we look at the outbreak time, when at the nursing home environment, people are were not allowed to get together with other people. It might be very close, very similar to a setting of living, of being all alone. So it might be close in this time. And it is really, really important to get into the nursing homes and to conduct research on loneliness and other consequences of the pandemic, for sure.
Okay, so thank you very much. This is the end of the panel number 4. And I would like to thank to Fernando, Melissa, and Sharon for their presentation. Now the conclusion of our webinar. We have just heard a very interesting presentation on subjects all different from the consequence of the COVID-19 pandemic. We learn how artificial intelligence technology can speed up patient analysis diagnostics, thereby regulating hospital admission or speeding up virus detection or better understanding the various symptoms of the disease. Strangely, it seems to me, at least, but I think some of the others would agree that the coronavirus pandemic also accelerate the merger of high tech with the healthcare industry, leading to a healthcare technology revolution that will happen much faster than it would otherwise have happened. However, it seems that the pandemic is a traumatic event that one is directly or indirectly concerned, and this can generate a strong emotional load, which is often very difficult to control, which can have repercussion on psychology level, and Professor Sharon explained one of the aspects. Our meeting only a few topics, while a large number of other topics are worth discussing, but this may be the subject of a future meeting. I would like to thank all the institutions and all the people who took part in the organization of this meeting, and in particular, all the speakers from France and Israel, as well as from the France-Israel Foundation, Dr. Muriel Chaim, from the French Embassy, Nathalie Barutia and Anne-Sophie Trouillard, from the Ministry of Science and Technology, Claire Levaton, Dr. Sharon Yagur-Kroll, Dr. Iris Eisenberg, Noah Barak-Veshler, and Liora Land, and the last and not least from the company Macom, Yael and Ido. In closing, I thank everyone who participated in this webinar. Hope to see you in another event. Thank you very much for your participation.